Welcome back to the Business of Writing. This is your place for freelance writing tips and real-world advice on earning income as a writer. If this is your first time listening, let me briefly tell you who I am and why I'm here. I've spent the last 20 or so years working in media, and I started this channel to help you cut through the noise and learn what it takes to be a working writer. I was a newspaper and magazine editor where I assigned stories to writers, and I've been on the other side of the table as a longtime freelance writer and content strategist. Over my years in the industry, I've gone from managing newsrooms to building a six-figure writing business. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share the income part of my story, the things that worked for me, and how I was able to build a sustainable career. I'll also talk about the lessons I learned along the way, as well as a couple of tips to help you meet your own goals. Now keep in mind, this is only one story. It's the path I took, and your path could look completely different. There is no single way to be a freelance writer. We all learn from each other, and we customize our journeys based on our unique needs and where we're at in life. And just to let you know what we'll be talking about today, we're going to chat about starting out, what that looked like for me, the importance of exploring a niche, and the role of landing contract work. I'll also go over a few lessons learned, so hopefully you can avoid some of my mistakes. So grab a notebook in case you want to take a couple of notes, and let's dive in. First, I want to start out by saying I didn't have any special degree in writing. I earned a very general communications degree in college, and I originally started out working in film. So if you don't have any kind of special writing certifications or training or a degree, that is 100% okay. I learned by doing, and so can you. I was self-taught when it came to turning my writing into a business, as most people are. Even the people I know who went to amazing creative writing and journalism schools, they were rarely offered business classes or told, hey, this is how you actually make a living, especially in the ever-changing media market. And if you're a working journalist who's been recently laid off, I feel for you. I have been there, and I know how much that sucks. It's one of the reasons why I started creating content around the business side of freelancing, because unfortunately, many creatives that I know were never taught how to run their own writing like a business or maintain a steady income. It's just not something that's really covered, especially in creative writing programs. So wherever you are in your journey and whatever your starting point, you absolutely have the ability to learn how to make a living with your writing. It's just going to take some trial and error, and you will find your sweet spot and build your portfolio and a client list. So having said all that, I started out as a generalist, and that just means I had no particular direction. I was very broke, and I desperately needed income, and there were no jobs because we were in a recession. I won't date myself by saying which recession it was, but there weren't any jobs. And I could not find anything in my field. So I said, okay, well, I can write. So how can I use that to make some money? I wasn't a journalist, but I had taken a journalism class in college, and I knew what the AP style book was. So I picked up a used copy for about $10 at a used bookstore. And for those of you who don't know, that's sort of like a Bible of journalism. It tells you all the different rules and helps you learn how to write for newspapers. So I'll put a link to that book and another book from the AP in the show description box so you can easily find it. I also signed up to write for a couple of content mills, and it was there that I learned how to write very fast, and they taught me about search engines and SEO and how to write for the internet. Now, if you don't know what a content mill is, that's amazing, and I am really happy for you. They don't really exist anymore because AI has replaced a lot of that kind of work. But basically what they were is they were companies that used to pay writers like $30 to knock out about 300 words of SEO slop. I do not recommend writing slop, but at that time, it was an easy way for students to make a few bucks, and it helped me pay my rent. So I wasn't going to be picky at that point in my life. And like I said, I will put a link to the AP style book and some other resources in the show description. So my long-winded point in all this is I was entirely self-taught, other than that one class in college that I barely paid attention to. So if I could learn how to be a working writer, you absolutely can too. A lot of new writers tell me that they don't know where to start because they don't have any particular interests, they don't really know what to do. And if that's you, being a jack of all trades is a totally fine place to start. For at least the first 2 years that I was writing, I would write about whatever, whenever, for whoever. The problem with that approach is that it's really hard to gain traction in one field and work up to higher paying assignments. But on the other hand, you're building clips in the beginning, and that's a great place to start. I mean, that is the goal. You need to build your clips. So, my first ongoing steady gig was writing for two local newspapers. They were owned by the same company as a lot of newspapers are now, but I got weekly assignments for each paper. So if there was a school board meeting or a city council event or a new construction project, I would show up, I would ask questions, and I would file a story. So if there's a local newspaper or a lifestyle magazine or something like that in your city, email the editor and ask if they need any freelance help. Chances are you can land an assignment and it will teach you how to work with editors, how to find resources and interview people, and how to write quickly and on deadline. If you already have journalism experience, that is awesome. You are already past this part. But for the people who are just starting out, this is a good way to learn the ropes. Writing for smaller publications helps you gather clips for your portfolio, and you'll start making connections within the community and with, leaders in the industry and editors. If you're coming from the news world, you already know that the pay isn't going to be great. You won't get rich as a newspaper stringer. That's what they call freelancers. They call them stringers. But it's a great way to get to know people and to establish yourself as a writer and to get used to working with editors and sort of publication deadlines and cycles. I really enjoyed writing for newspapers, but it didn't take me long to figure out that the real income in freelancing is finding a profitable niche. The truth is, it's really hard to stand out and get good paying assignments if you're just trying to do everything. Luckily for me, I was based in Houston at the time, and I got assigned a lot of transportation and energy stories. There are tons of energy companies based here, and transportation is hotly debated. If you know Houston, you know that's the truth. So there was always something to write about. And the more I learned about these industries and got to know, different key players and their media representatives, the more editors started reaching out with assignments. It was kind of like a snowball effect. So every time I would have an article published, I would update my portfolio, and I kept portfolios on free websites. I had my own portfolio. I used my LinkedIn profile. I made sure that my stuff was out there, and it wasn't long before I was hired as a staff reporter and later became an editor. So, for about a year, maybe a little longer, I worked for a newspaper while I was still writing freelance articles for a couple of magazines on the side. And even though I fell into energy and transportation news, I really love the food and hospitality industries. So I kept pitching food and restaurant and travel articles in my downtime. I ended up getting several assignments with a couple of magazines, and so for about 5 years, I was doing that on the side, and I loved it. It wasn't big money, but I got to write about hotels and restaurants and, trends and things that I found fun. So that part was amazing. And on the newspaper front, if you've ever worked in a newsroom, then you know that the burnout can be real. After a couple of years in news, one of my contacts asked me if I would consider working on a writing project for their company. The pay would be incredible, but it was only a 3-month contract. And it was a big decision, but I said, yep, I went ahead and took it. I left news behind and I went to work on the corporate side as a business writer. This was an energy company, so I made sure to stop covering them in any articles that I might pitch or work on as a freelancer. And that's one big thing that you want to watch out for. You never want to create any kind of conflict of interest. You don't want to write about any company if you've worked with them or if you do any kind of contract work with them on the side. So at that point, I decided that I needed to shift my journalism work to only writing about, food, restaurants, hospitality, and taking on corporate writing gigs within the energy field. So that way there would be no overlap between the two areas of work. And here's something that I don't see enough people talking about. Over the last few years in particular, a lot of companies across all kinds of industries want to hire former journalists. They're getting snapped up for writing projects and contract gigs like crazy. Companies want to hire writers who understand journalistic ethics. They want writers who can incorporate research and data into their storytelling, and they want writers who can bring journalistic standards to their internal and external communications. So when I started to make this shift, I quickly realized that the real money is in having a niche. So here's a quick question for you. Do you already have a niche that you specialize in? And if you don't, what would you want to write about? And how could you start kind of getting into that industry? Having a niche alone isn't going to get you across that six-figure line, but having a profitable niche will definitely help. One thing to consider when exploring different niches is whether or not the industry is heavily involved in research. Often, industries that invest in a lot of R&D or research and development will have large writing budgets because they need to effectively communicate their new, innovations, their products, their ideas. They need to communicate with the general public. So think about industries like tech, finance, health, business. There are a lot of industries that need to communicate complex issues to the public. And that can be a real sweet spot for writers, especially if you're able to, break down complex subjects. Research isn't the only criteria for having a big writing budget, though, so I linked to an article about high-paying niches in the podcast description. Now, this doesn't mean that you can only write in high-paying areas. The reason I developed two niches is because I love writing about hotels and food, but the pay just wasn't that high, at least not for me. Some people might make a ton with that. And on the other side of that coin, though, you definitely shouldn't write about something that you hate just because it pays well. I can almost guarantee that you will be miserable and you will want to quit. For me, I wasn't particularly interested in energy, but I found angles within that industry that I became fascinated with. Specifically, I was very focused on the energy transition and global carbon reduction goals. I became immersed in new energy technologies and research around alternative fuels because that is something that I had covered within my transportation days. So whatever area that you start writing in, look for particular angles that interest you. You can absolutely niche down within a niche. And when you're passionate about learning and hearing more about a subject, it makes it so much easier to pitch new ideas and to keep pursuing assignments. Plus, as you learn more and you make more contacts, you could become a go-to writer in that field. I've definitely seen that happen with people. So at this point in my story, most of my income was coming from a couple of ongoing magazine relationships, and I had a few, maybe one or two clients a year who were hiring me for different, business writing projects. It was kind of a mishmash of whatever came my way, and I would have moved a lot faster and made more income if I'd had a direction or some kind of plan. But honestly, I was kind of blowing in the wind. I was just kind of taking whatever. My income was not great, but it was definitely enough to pay the basics like rent, groceries, gas, insurance, all that. So it was like enough to be okay, but not great. And I needed to be more strategic. So I decided, well, I'll reach out to web designers and I'll try to start some kind of content writing partnerships. I got more focused on pitching. I landed more magazine assignments. And I decided I would start building relationships with some small business owners to see if they could use my help with emails and video scripts and things that I was familiar with. But I realized as I started doing this that I really didn't have enough of the skills that small businesses needed. I needed to better understand marketing and consumer psychology. Even though I had a communication degree, I really did not know anything about marketing or business or any type of consumer behavior. I didn't understand how to write copy that would convert. So my first attempts at sales copy, they weren't bad, but they really didn't go anywhere. And I needed to figure out how to get better to kind of, prove my value to business owners. So as you're listening to this, you may already have a sales background, or you may already understand the fundamentals of why people buy and marketing. But if you don't have that kind of background or marketing or sales experience, you may want to read a few books or watch some videos about consumer behavior and persuasive writing. It's an ongoing process, but if you can read a couple of these books a year, it'll really help you broaden your communication skills, and it helps you understand your audiences better, whether you're doing journalism or copywriting. I'll include a link to the 10 books that I found most helpful during that time period in the show description. So, once I started studying and upping my skills in this area, things really started to heat up. Let's talk about contract work and getting ongoing assignments with regular clients. This is where it starts to happen. Securing ongoing contract and retainer work is what finally pushed my income to the six-figure mark. Contract and retainer projects are when you work with a company for as little as 3 to 6 months, or it could be as long as several years, depending on the project and what you're writing for them. So you basically become a paid contractor. You're paid a contract or retainer rate that's typically higher than a regular direct hire job rate because you're responsible for your own benefits. In most cases, this is going to be a 1099 situation, or they'll call it an independent contractor situation. In many industries, companies rely on independent contractors and agencies to supply copywriters and content strategists. The reason is because the marketing department is usually the first thing to get cut when a company wants to save money. Because of this, a lot of companies rely on contract writers for their marketing and communication teams. It's an easy way for them to add and cut staff and writers and content strategists without having to constantly go through the process of hiring and laying off people. So once my portfolio had filled out and I had been steadily freelancing for a couple of years, recruiters started reaching out to me directly with these kind of opportunities. But is that the only way to find long-term clients like this? No, definitely not. It's all about building relationships. It really is that simple. Over the years, I made a point to stay connected with different editors and marketing managers and agencies and just various people that I had worked with in my early days and beyond. From the very, very beginning, I made my best effort to always deliver high quality content on time and on budget. That was kind of my motto for a very long time, and it still is, to be honest. I try to be as pleasant as possible to work with as well. I know these things sound so simple, but they go a long way. Back when I was an editor, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I also spent 3 years running a trade magazine. So I used to hire freelancers all the time. And let me tell you, a whole lot of people out there will just flake out or deliver substandard work or like turn in kind of crap and then ghost you. Like, it happens. And these people create a lot of stress and hassle, and they are never invited back. But there are also a lot of really great, reliable freelancers who are easy to work with. They deliver solid work, they can meet a deadline, and those people are an editor's lifeline. Those are the kind of writers that are keepers. If you can be solid, accurate, and reliable, you will be able to make and keep connections, and people will think of you when they need a writer. So once you've got a pretty solid portfolio, you could, send a simple email or a LinkedIn message to people that you've worked with in the past. Let them know you're freelancing and that you'd love to chat or have a coffee if they need help. That often leads to opportunities, or people will put you in touch with someone that they know who needs a writer. And don't limit this activity just to editors and marketing professionals. Stay in touch with other freelance writers too. Many, many times I have referred freelancing work to freelancing friends, if I didn't have the bandwidth for a project, and other writers have done the same for me. In fact, one of my former writing colleagues contacted me several years after we worked together and referred me to a marketing agency that needed an extra freelance writer for a particular project. And that ended up turning into a 2-year collaboration. So, keep in touch with people and, try to be as professional as possible. Here's another quick question for you. Are there any past colleagues, clients, or anyone from your school or professional past who might need help with writing? Don't be afraid to let them know that you're freelancing now and that you're available, and ask them for referrals. Long-term, well-paying clients often come through professional referrals. It's the most successful method that I've seen for building long-term, ongoing working relationships with agencies and clients. So finally, I want to wrap up with just a few lessons that I wish I had learned earlier so you can avoid these massive pitfalls. First, and most important, don't chase low-paying gigs. I see this so much, and very early on, I fell into this a lot. I spent so much more time than I should have on projects that didn't pay well. That content mill example that I gave earlier, that is one of them. I got stuck feeling, kind of secure rather than stretching myself to go after bigger projects. And it's better to focus on a fewer high-paying projects than it is to try to juggle a dozen low-paying ones. Second, Don't be afraid to invest in yourself and your business. And what I mean by that is, if you're able to, pay that extra money to register your own domain name for your portfolio, pay for the tools you need, get the Grammarly paid subscription, buy the books you want to read, join the associations and pay the association membership fees if there's a particular area you want to write in, take a course if you need to. I would have learned the business side of writing so much faster if I had taken just a few business or marketing classes sooner. Investing in yourself and your business, does pay off over time. Third, set boundaries. This one is so important. Your well-being and your mental health are important. When I first started out, I said yes to literally everything. I had no direction. I wasted years burning myself out trying to do everything for everyone. And as you start earning more income and you start getting more projects, it's so tempting to just take on everything. But don't be afraid to say no to projects that don't align with your goals. That's just as important as saying yes to the right things. I couldn't have focused on developing high-paying, long-term client relationships if I was burning myself out all the time trying to be everything to everyone. Cannot stress that enough. So there you have it. That was the quick nutshell version of my freelancing journey. I'd say it took probably about 10 years from the first really low paying gigs to, really finding my stride in my niche and figuring out how to balance, contract work and clients and, occasional magazine articles, which I still write sometimes. But it's not as much of a focus anymore. I hope that you've gotten a few ideas, maybe some inspiration from this podcast, and that it helps you to plan your own journey to consistent income. If you found this episode useful, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And if you're ready to learn more and plan a freelancing journey that is uniquely suited to you, visit livewritepublish.com or visit the resources in the show description. I'm building out content constantly to try to help writers, really up their business skills so they don't get trapped in these sort of, low-paying cycles for a long time. Thank you for listening to The Business of Writing. Until next time, keep writing and keep growing your freelancing knowledge.